You're listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 345.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're all doing well. And we are headed into Easter weekend here. In my Catholic faith, we call this the Easter Triduum. It consists of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter or Holy Saturday, and then, of course, Easter Sunday. We will be staying home this year and getting together with our family on Saturday for a brunch. But other than that, sticking close to home, enjoying having one of my sons here for the weekend and spending some time together, all, of course, culminating in our celebration of Easter, which is a very special holiday for us. So thinking of everybody who's celebrating Easter, hope you have a beautiful spring-filled weekend. And today on the show, we have a fun interview with Steph Pixley. Steph is the deputy food editor for America's Test Kitchen Books team and the culinary producer of the Cook's Country TV show. She attended the New England Culinary Institute and is most at peace when she is in the middle of a good baking project. So Steph's involvement in the creation of America's Test Kitchen book, Baking for Two, 200 small batch recipes from lazy bakes to layer cakes, was the perfect project for Steph. In this book, they take the guesswork out of baking on a smaller scale by totally reengineering all your favorite baked goods. Think of making 4 biscuits, 2 small tarts, or a 6-inch snack cake. Whether you have an impromptu craving or want a recipe for pizza night, an intimate celebration, or a lazy Sunday morning, this collection rises to the occasion with streamlined ingredient lists, equipment needs, and instructions. We talk on the podcast all about their inspiration for this book, how to turn your freezer into a treat factory with make-ahead batters and doughs that let you bake off just 1 cinnamon bun for breakfast. And we talk about the breadth of recipes in this book, everything from cookies and blondies to flatbreads and pizza. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Steph Pixley. Hi, Steph. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, excited for you to be here. Can't wait to talk about beautiful new book, Baking for Two. But before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a deputy food editor at America's Test Kitchen, which is the dream job that it sounds like. I manage a group of test cooks as they develop recipes for cookbooks. I edit manuscripts, I oversee photography, but really my day-to-day is filled with tasting delicious food and giving feedback. So smallest violin ever, it is a hard job, but I love it. It really is a dream job. Before I got started at ATK, I really always loved experimenting in the kitchen. I was always, quote unquote, helping in the kitchen around dinner time, experimenting, mixing things together. And baking has really always been my happy place. It's the thing I want to do on the weekends to de-stress or if I have extra time. And so I was so excited to work on this project. I think generally I love eating all kinds of food, but tend to cook mostly simple, unfussy food at home, especially now that I have a toddler.
Yeah.
And so I brought that ethos into the recipe selection for this book. I wanted to make sure that it felt unfussy, simple, but also that there was options for every day and every occasion and for every kind of baking, whether that's mixing together biscuit dough or a full day weekend project. So I hope that's captured in the book.
Yeah, because baking isn't just making cookies or cakes.
Right.
Tell us about the breadth of what. Well, before we get into that, I want to ask a question. And I often wonder, like, why would you write a baking for two book? This had to have come from somewhere. Like, what was your all's reason for wanting to invest the resources at America's Test Kitchen in this project?
Yeah. So America's Test Kitchen is made up of a cookbook department, but we also have two magazines that are a part of America's Test Kitchen, Cook's Country magazine and Cook's Illustrated magazine. And for a few years now, Cook's Illustrated magazine has had a small batch baking column. And that has been helmed by Andrea Geary over the years. And those recipes were incredibly well received. Anytime the recipes went on the web, there were numerous comments from home bakers, home cooks, ATK fans saying, please give me a whole book of small batch baking. So that was obviously one big indicator. But I think also 10 years ago, we developed a cooking for two cookbook, which was more comprehensive. It was savory food, it was breakfast, it was everything you'd ever need to cook for two people. And that book has done incredibly well. It has had great longevity, and it had a small section of desserts and baking, but we felt like there was a lot of opportunity there to dive in further and to modernize the flavors and the approach to baking for two. I think the way that we think about for two cooking, eating, baking has changed in the last 10 years, and the audience around cooking for two or baking for two has expanded dramatically. So it was time to give a fresh approach to a baking for two audience.
Yeah, and it would seem to me that cooking for two would be something that I would think has been like around a while. Couples, people who are retired, maybe even people who are single and they want, smaller recipes. Of course, because it's cooking, it would be things they were eating for dinner or they invited a friend over. But taking this into the baking space feels like a whole new area. And of course, the fact that you had the small batch baking column, I'm sure that helped to kind of test the waters to see that people were really interested in this. So did you use recipes from the column or did you recreate new recipes?
We did use some of the recipes from the column. I mean, I think there haven't been that many that have been published. It's been going on for a few years now. So this book is a collection of 200 plus recipes.
Wow.
So we definitely added to that selection.
Yeah.
I think truly, though, a baking for two book is appealing to a really broad population. I think one of the amazing things about baking that I love is that baking is truly for pleasure. Like, you never have to eat that chocolate chip cookie or that slice of cake, but you do it because you have a craving or a sweet tooth, or you want to share something special with a friend or a loved one, or it's a special occasion. It's really purposeful. You set out because you want to make this thing specifically to enjoy, not to necessarily fill your belly and move you along in your day. And I think that message resonates with a really broad audience. I mean, I am not retired. I have a husband and a toddler, and I find myself fitting into this category of baking for two. My husband doesn't have a big sweet tooth, and I'd rather not have 24 cookies at the ready for my toddler and I to indulge in at our whim. So this book really appeals to a really broad audience. And I think baking can be intimidating, especially for younger audiences. Maybe they grew up eating their mom or their dad's favorite baked good, but they don't know how to scale that down. It's not easy to have a recipe and get the same thing as you expected from the full scale version. And I think that baking is a science. So that's really where ATK was able to step in and say, well, we'll do the testing, we'll make the mistakes, we'll figure it out so that it's approachable for any kind of an audience.
Yeah. And this is a pretty broad baking book. We're not just talking cookies and pies.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the breadth of what you've done.
Yeah. So this book, I mean, baking in my mind is not just dessert. It is bread, it is pizza, it is breakfast, it is snacks, it is dessert for sure. There's a lot of desserts in this book, but there's no knead bread in here. There's scones, there's whole wheat biscuits. It's really trying to find ways for baking to fit into your life whenever, whatever time of day that might be, and however you can. If you love baking, you want to do it like all the time. At least I do. I want to figure out how to make the next project or the next snack or whatever. And so we tried to make sure that there was a really broad variety of types of recipes and flavors for lots of people. We have empanadas in here. We have calzones. We have spanakopita. It's really like anything you put in the oven, we would consider relevant for this book. Even some maybe not necessarily oven baked, like scallion pancakes. You're using flour, you're shaping dough, but it doesn't go in the oven. It's all cooked on the stovetop, but it's in this book.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let me ask you a question. If I have a recipe in my kitchen for chocolate chip cookies and I think to myself, okay, I really just want to scale this back. I don't want to make 5 dozen. I only want to make 1 dozen. Couldn't I just cut everything by fifths and like
You
make it?
you could try it. You could try it. Generally, I think the biggest challenge to scaling things down is actually eggs. If you think about that chocolate chip cookie recipe, maybe it makes 5 dozen cookies and maybe it uses 3 eggs and 2 yolks or something. And how
Mhm.
do you scale that down?
Right.
Do you whisk together 3 eggs, 2 yolks, weigh that, divide it by, like, that sounds so complicated. And we took the approach of, okay, so you're interested in small batch baking. You probably don't want to have a half an egg left over in your fridge. You probably don't want to use odd amounts of obscure ingredients. And so we thought about what goes into a baked good when you're adding an egg. Is the egg there for binding? Is it there for added fat? Is it there for added moisture? And we sort of re engineered the recipes to think about, okay, if it's added moisture, what if you just add milk or water? If it's added fat, how about you just increase the butter or maybe add sour cream? So we did all that testing to figure out how to achieve a smaller batch version of your favorite recipe without having odds and ends left over.
Yeah. What are some things that surprised you when you started to scale these recipes back that you don't think that, like, it would have really been hard for those of us who want to bake on a smaller scale to discover on our own in our home? What are you going to save us time with?
Well, so I think there were a lot of big science discoveries here for me. Some of it was, like I was mentioning with the eggs, it was about what is the function of this ingredient in this recipe and discovering, okay, it's fat, it's moisture, it's binding. I think another very specific example that I think speaks to what America's Test Kitchen does best is with our croissant recipe. So croissants is a very big project recipe, and I think our recipe that we have in our archive makes 13 croissants or something like that, which is a lot of croissants to have on hand. And we wanted to make a version that made less, that you could stock some in your freezer, maybe bake some right away, but was more reasonable to have on hand and take up space in your freezer. And we found that when working with yeasted doughs in smaller quantities, yeast actually, there's this sort of tag along effect that happens where when you're working in large batches, yeast becomes more efficient. So when you're scaling recipes down, yeast is actually less active. So
Mm.
you have to allow for more rising time for a small batch croissant than you might for a full size croissant, because that yeast is less present and it needs to work harder than if there was more yeast in that recipe.
That's
And we didn't want
interesting.
to have it taste yeasty, so you couldn't just add,
Yeah.
there's all this troubleshooting that happened.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
were a lot of science discoveries for sure.
Yeah. Any others that come to mind? I'm curious about like pots or pans, like what kind of
Yeah.
equipment I might need to do this.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about for myself with cooking generally is not having to buy a special piece of equipment ever. I am really minimalist. I love my cast iron skillet. I have cake pans and I have muffin tins and I have pie plates, but that's about it. And I'm not really willing to invest in teeny tiny bundt pans or one off like 2 cup muffin tins or something like that. And I felt like that would be valuable to engineer our recipes so that they worked in multiple different kinds of vessels. So we included lots and lots of what we called pan swaps in this book. So, for example, blondies is a recipe that, of course, has a place here. We scaled the blondie recipe down to serve just the right number of people, make just the right number of bars. But then, how do you make a small batch blondie? We found actually a loaf pan is a really good option for that. But we also kind of wanted to explore other options. Loaf pan's great if you like corner pieces, there's like great edging, but you can also make it in a cast iron skillet, or you could also make it in a muffin tin, or you could also make it in a 6-inch cake pan. So we include all of this information with all of our recipes so that depending on what you're in the mood for, if you want a chewy brownie or blondie or more of a cakey blondie or a corner piece, or you're just looking at your what's clean in your cabinets and you're saying today it's a loaf pan day, those recipes will work for you.
Yeah, I think that's pretty neat that you could make a small batch of blondies in a loaf pan. Makes me want to go make some after we finish here, because what a great thing to make. But there are more like the croissants, more complicated things than just the
Yes,
cookies and the bars. And
definitely.
what's the mindset I might have to get into to approach a restaurant, a recipe that is maybe something I consider a little bit more complicated when I'm only going to make a smaller quantity? Does it make it easier to do something that maybe I hadn't tackled before?
Um, I want to say yes, but I think honestly, those project recipes are I find the joy of making them is in the project itself. It's in the taking the time, reading through the steps, feeling the dough, like setting aside the right amount of
Yep.
time in order
Yep.
to achieve it.
Yep.
Um, I think that in my mind, there is you know, a baker who grew up in a big family who was able to make large scale cakes on a weekend and they got eaten up in a day, and then life changes and your family gets smaller and you still want to you love baking project recipes, but you don't want to have that stuff hanging out. And it's not that you don't want to take the time anymore, it's that you don't want to have all that waste.
Yeah.
You do want to take that time, you take the joy in it, and you still want a really delicious end result. So
Yeah.
we do have a few more project-y recipes in this book that speak to that kind of a baker.
Yeah, because some baked goods are not as tasty uh, several days after you bake it. Like it's really best the
Right.
day you bake it, or maybe the next day. And
Absolutely.
the fact that you can do small quantities seems like that takes care of that problem. Or you're taking it into
Absolutely.
work, or you're sending it to a neighbor, and you're always looking for
Right.
ways to get rid of extra baked goods. Where I would imagine with this book, we don't have to worry about that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So what about things that I might like to have on hand? What are some tips? I read that there's some suggestions for freezing different things so that
Yeah.
I could maybe have fresh baked things at a moment's notice. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about the research that you did that went into that.
Yeah. So this speaks to another kind of audience that you might expect this book to appeal towards. Someone who likes to stock their freezer, who likes baking, again, doesn't want to have 24 cookies on hand, but wants to have 12, but obviously they're not going to eat 12 cookies before they go bad. So we included several recipes that are from the freezer recipes or that have a freezer component to them. So, for example, cookies, drop cookies. All of our cookies were scaled down to make 12, and they include instructions for freezing cookie dough balls essentially, and then baking from frozen. So you can bake a couple at a time. You can bake half the recipe to start and freeze the other half. It's sort of up to you. I think that that's a really convenient one to have on hand for, if you have a kid and they occasionally bring their friends over and you want to have a quick snack
Yeah.
or something for them. I think there's also some more project-y recipes that are really fun, stock the freezer options. We developed these from the freezer cinnamon buns, which I love this recipe so much. I love cinnamon buns. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
But making cinnamon buns is a project.
Yep.
And I want them in the morning for breakfast. And I'm not going to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning in order to have fresh cinnamon buns ready for my family when they're ready for brunch at 10 o'clock in the morning or whatever. So we decided to create these from the freezer versions. So we scaled down our cinnamon bun recipe to make, I believe it's 6 cinnamon buns. And we made them so that you can freeze individual cinnamon buns, take one out, take two out, take six out if you want, and bake them whenever you want. And we developed a glaze that is perfectly proportioned for 2 cinnamon buns. So, maybe what my weekend project this weekend is I'm going to stock my freezer with these cinnamon buns so that on my Tuesday morning when I need a little boost in the morning, I can have a fresh cinnamon bun, and that's a super amazing treat to start my
Yeah.
weekday.
Yeah. And this whole concept of stocking our freezer with
Yeah.
baked goods might be
Yeah.
completely new to some people listening to this
Yeah.
episode. And it's something that really even stretches my mind a little bit because stocking our freezer for meals is not uncommon.
Mhm.
Stocking our freezer as a way of food preservation for vegetables, it's not
Yeah.
uncommon. Let's talk about this freezing a little bit more because I
Yeah.
was looking in this whole section, make the most of your freezer.
Yeah.
Cookies, biscuits. I think the cinnamon buns is really great. What about the other pastries that we can freeze ahead?
Yeah. So we have this great recipe for from the freezer muffins, where you mix up your muffin dough, pop the dough in the freezer, and then you can bake 1 or 2 muffins at a time. We also have dinner rolls. These are the best dinner rolls. I make them for Thanksgiving. They're amazing for Thanksgiving specifically because you can make it six
Yep.
weeks ahead of time, have them par baked in your freezer, pull them out and bake them day of, right before eating. Croissants, morning buns, pastries, cinnamon buns. Like you really can stock your freezer with all kinds of delicious treats, but you can also view your freezer as a starting point for baking projects too. So thinking about, sure, maybe you always want to have frozen peas on hand, but what about puff pastry
Mhm.
or phyllo or pie
Mhm.
dough? You can make those items and keep it, not puff pastry or phyllo. You
Right.
can make pie dough and keep it in your freezer so that if the mood strikes and it's sour cherry season, you can whip up your favorite sour cherry pie.
Right. And you recommend the pie dough in the book that can be frozen. Pizza dough
Yeah.
can probably be frozen.
Yes.
But to
Yes,
buy
definitely.
At the grocery store, supermarket,
Yes.
phyllo dough and puff pastry, keep those in the
Yeah.
freezer. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a guest a couple weeks ago that said that she really thinks that using puff pastry and learning how to use it can really elevate savory and sweet things that you can bake from
Hmm.
appetizers to different kinds of tarts. And she said it's
Yes.
really an amazing product to learn how to use. And also, I think it's neat.
Absolutely.
Of course, it's in this book, and it would be for smaller quantities.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. We
All
have a
right.
few
So,
really nice breakfast pastries that use store-bought puff pastry actually that are bakery style breakfast pastries, and they're really simple to whip together. So
mm,
I love project bakes, but puff pastry has foiled me time and time again. So
yeah,
I
that's
will
great.
always stock my freezer.
Great. Wonderful. Stock in the freezer. What about my oven? Do I have to heat my oven for a small batch in the same way?
No, no, you don't, which is really cool too. I think when we were developing this recipe, sometimes in recipe development at America's Test Kitchen, we kind of lose sight of the home cook experience, right? Like we have I think it's a 10,000 square foot test kitchen with 30 wall ovens and endless burners and counter space. And so sometimes, you don't think necessarily twice about, okay, I'm putting 2 cookie dough balls on a roomed baking sheet and putting it in this oven to bake for 10 to 12 minutes. Like that doesn't seem weird. But then when you take it home, you're like, wow, I have to heat my oven up for
Yeah.
15 minutes. It's the middle of summer. Like
Yeah.
that's really annoying. I just want 2 cookies. So we've done a lot of work on the cookbook team with equipment books, and we've done a few cookbooks on toaster ovens and air fryers. And we did a lot of testing in this book around using a toaster oven for these recipes and found the toaster oven is amazingly successful. You should really go to it for many, many circumstances if you're just baking 1 or 2 items where it doesn't make sense to heat up your whole oven. I will say there are a few instances where it does not work, like flatbreads and pizzas that require a pizza stone. You just can't fit a pizza stone in your toaster oven. The toaster oven just doesn't get hot enough. It's gonna be a lackluster result. But then on top of the toaster oven, we also did some testing around air fryers. Air fryers are great. They don't work as universally as a toaster oven, I will say, for baked goods, just because of the construction of them. They're a little bit more, they're not exactly like an oven, obviously, in the way they look. And the way the heat is distributed, you kind of end up with some wonky results sometimes. So we did develop, I think it's 35 recipes in this book that include air fryer cooking instructions, one of which is a Basque style cheesecake. So, broad range of types of recipes again.
Yeah.
So yes, I really love that you don't have to turn on your oven to cook a scone or cookie or a cake.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I've ran across a chocolate chip cookie recipe. I think it was with a former guest, in her book. It was all about chocolate chip cookie recipes, not just for
Sounds
cookies, but
great.
for everything. And she did have a recipe in there for 2 or 3 cookies baked in the toaster oven. And that's the first time I had experience baking on a small scale.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, it was so nice to be able to do that. And it was really easy
Yeah.
to put together, bake them in the
Yeah.
toaster oven. The other thing that happens when you bake on a small quantity like that of cookies is I'm not standing in there like baking multiple trays of
Yeah.
cookies. It's just
Right.
like you mix it up
One
and
and
you
done.
bake them and you're done and you have cookies.
And your house smells wonderful and it
Smells
didn't get
good.
too
Yes.
hot.
So that was great. I'm excited to try some other things in the
Yeah.
toaster oven. So
Yeah.
what about cakes? How are we doing cakes
Yeah.
for a small number of people?
Okay, I'm so excited you asked me about this. This was actually sort of my passion project for this book. I'm a firm believer that everybody should be able to have cake, regardless of how many people there are. And sometimes you don't want to have too much cake around. I get it. Like one slice of cake is the right amount for your health reasons, for portion reasons, whatever. And I find it really hard to find a recipe for a cake for two. That's like, it's impossible.
Mhm.
So I developed 2 cake recipes for this book specifically that that aimed to answer this question of like, I want a birthday cake for 2 people. So I developed a vanilla cake and a chocolate cake, and I developed a whole spread of frostings and fillings so that you can mix and match frostings, fillings, layer cakes to whatever flavors you like. I think the really cool thing about these cakes is that I thought really hard about the construction of them and the pan swap that we talked about earlier. So
Mhm.
the vanilla cake and the chocolate cake, I think most traditionally are baked in a cake pan. The recipes are written to be baked in a 6-inch cake pan, which is kind of the standard 4-2 size cake pan.
Mhm.
But then I was trying to think of like, could we get fun and playful with this? And that's like your sort of standard sheet cakes look, I guess, cake. But what if you just want like a stack, like a beautiful layer cake or like a slice kind of stack of a cake? So we ended up developing the recipe to also work in an 8 sheet pan, which
Oh,
is this really adorable, I think it's 9 by 6 inch shrimped baking sheet that once you put it in your pantry, this is the one thing that I did buy and that I use all the time. You can spread your batter into that cake. It bakes in like no time flat and then cut the cake into quarters and stack the layers for this really tall, beautiful slice. And then the other option is a ramekin that you can then slice into 3 layers and decorate like your favorite bakery style layer cake. One of my favorite combinations was the vanilla cake with a passion fruit curd and a raspberry buttercream.
Wow.
That combination of flavors was just so good. And the passion fruit curd, the raspberry buttercream, it made just enough for those cakes. You don't have extras laying around, though even if you did, would not be the end of the world. You'd figure out how to use them. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Mhm.
amazing to think that you could make a small cake with a recipe that's already tested for the fruit curd and for the
Yeah.
frosting and for the batter. And it just is the
Yes.
perfect amount for that size cake. And it's not
Yeah.
just a basic chocolate cake or basic,
Yeah.
it's nice to have all those options. So that's a really, really great thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
When I think about, I had a daughter, I have a daughter, and when she was a teenager, she loved to bake and she loved to have like a friend over. They would make something, and how perfect a lot of these recipes would even be
Mhm.
for them.
Mhm. Totally. Yes, absolutely. It's smaller, it's simpler, it's more
And you get
approachable,
to the end point probably, I would imagine you get there
faster.
quicker. Right.
Yes,
Right.
definitely.
And
Yeah,
you
it
can,
cools
and it's easy to
faster.
manage maybe smaller quantity.
Yep.
Kind of fun to,
Mhm.
they like cute, like I think
Oh
about a
yeah,
little 6-inch cake or a stacked cake being got the
absolutely.
cute
Yeah,
appeal going, and I could just see how
absolutely.
they totally would love being able to
Yes.
bake something like that. But
Yeah.
this book is so much more than that. You have empanadas, you have a ham
Mhm.
and cheese pocket, you have
Mhm.
pizza. Let's
Mhm.
talk about some of the savory things that are in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have I mean, the semi-sweet savory end of that would be biscuits, scones. We have a lot of really great recipes for like starter bakers who are just learning to put together breads themselves. I think biscuits are a really, really great recipe to they're high reward, low effort
Mhm.
recipes. And similarly, though, like you don't want to have a lot of extra biscuits hanging around. So we have a lot of different options for biscuits, for scones. Um, Similarly, we created a lot of freezer, air fryer baking options there. We did some interesting flavor combinations, sun-dried tomato and za'atar biscuits. We did these whole wheat buttermilk biscuits, and then your classic kind of cream biscuits.
Yeah.
Um, from there, we also did a whole section on breads and rolls. So I mentioned earlier, we have whole wheat, no knead mini country bowl. It's like the cutest little loaf you've ever seen. It's kind of like you've got to make a soup bowl out of it kind of a thing. But it's like a delicious bakery style rustic loaf that you'll be super impressed with yourself that you made it.
Yeah, and I think you have some monkey bread made with frozen dinner rolls, a honey
Mm-hmm.
thyme monkey
Yeah,
bread, which actually is a nice twist to not have the caramely sweet monkey bread,
totally.
but have the thyme in it. Popovers.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
we
Bacon
uh,
cheddar
roast we
muffins.
roast rib roast every Christmas, and
Mm-hmm.
popovers are so good. And I think to
Yes.
be able to make them in a smaller quantity, um, they're not difficult to make. I mean, it's flour and
No.
salt and milk and
Yeah.
eggs, and they're so
Yeah.
delicious. And then a
They are.
cornbread recipe also.
Of course, you can't not have a cornbread.
Yes. Tell us about the pizzas and a little bit about the pizza dough. If I want to have the pizza dough in my freezer, you just make the quantity that's in the book and freeze that, or do you suggest doubling it, or what are you recommending for having your freezer stocked with pizza dough?
Yeah, well, I think that um, I would probably just make the recipe as it's written and freeze it. I think, if you're making pizza, it's simple enough to just make 2 batches. I probably wouldn't double it just because the recipe is written to work in the food processor with the specific amount of dough, and so the mixing times might be a little bit different. But if your mixer's dirty, once you scrape out that pizza dough, just make another one and freeze it. Why not? You've already got those ingredients out. We have a really, really great pizza dough recipe that really relies on time to build flavor, which I love too. super simple. It sits in the refrigerator at least overnight and up to a few days, and it's really, really delicious. I think we also have a whole wheat pizza dough. One of the things that I really wanted to do in this book was to include whole grains wherever possible. I think they add really nice flavor and interest, and I want to do more baking with whole grains. But we have our classic thin crust pizza with some flavor variations. We have a cast iron pan pizza, which is kind of like a take on like a Pizza Hut pan pizza, which is delicious. But then we also kind of experimented a little bit. We have this really amazing mushroom miso flatbread that we developed that is a pizza dough base with some sauteed mushrooms, a really simple miso vinegar dressing that you drizzle over top with arugula, sesame seeds, and bonito flakes, which you can skip if you're not into, but I love the smoky, rich, savory, salty umami flavor that it adds. It's like a really fancy restaurant style flatbread.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's more than just that kind of flatbread. Tell us,
Totally.
talked about scallion pancakes.
Yes.
There's quite a few other ones in here as well.
Yes. Yeah. We also have a really great focaccia recipe, actually. I tasked my colleague Joe Gitter with developing a simple focaccia, which he took very seriously. And it has a really simple method to it. It's really hands off, similarly, just letting time do the work. It's so, so flavorful. And then we have a few really amazing flatbreads like a manaish zatar, which is a Levantine street food flatbread. We have with a few variations. It's got like a za'atar topping. We have one that tops with tomato and one with cheese. So it could be used as like a side for your dinner, or it could be your dinner itself.
Mm. And then I see corn tortilla, flour tortilla, pan-grilled flatbreads, and pepitas.
Yeah. It's nice to be able to try your hand at making those. They don't have to be store-bought all the time, and it's fun to experiment with that sort of a recipe.
Yeah, and that brings up another point about this. If there's something someone has been wanting to bake and this is the first time, you're not as at risk with a large quantity of ingredients when you bake a smaller amount. You can try it, you can try the technique, you can see how it turns out, and you're not investing a ton of ingredients to try something new.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
It's not as wasteful all around if things don't go well, but also if you have a few leftovers, you definitely do not have as many leftovers.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, it's a beautiful book, a lot of beautiful photography that everyone will enjoy, and it's more than just recipes. There's explanations about, certain techniques like the cakes, filling them, making the frosting, stocking your freezer, preparing the pans, tips all about the air fryer, the toaster oven. So it really is, I could see a book that you could use year round to bake for two. And the fact that it has over 200 small batch recipes, it really does, I'm sure, go from January to December and all the seasons in between.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I love it.
Yeah. How's it been? You have been promoting it, talking about it. What's the avenue that America's Test Kitchen uses to get the word out? I'm sure you talk about it in your magazine, on your shows.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Magazine shows, newsletters. We have several newsletters where we sometimes share the recipes or make mention of upcoming releases or just released. We have local media that we work with, as well as podcasts and the like. So it's always exciting to see the book in public, to see the public reaction to it, because it's, writing a cookbook is a long, long process, and you kind of get lost in it sometimes. And so to see it out in the wild is really exciting. So
yeah, it is very exciting. So I'm excited to have a copy. I'm going to have to try some of the recipes, and baking for 200 plus small batch recipes from lazy bakes to layer cakes. So Steph, something I like to ask all of my guests as we're wrapping up is about cookbooks. Also, as you can imagine, I'm always curious if you have a favorite cookbook and what that might be.
Yes. As you can imagine, I have quite a cookbook collection, so it's really hard to pick a favorite. I definitely oscillate between several cookbooks, and it's very seasonal based. As we enter spring right now, I think I'm really getting excited about fresh produce again. The farmers markets are starting to be a little bit more interesting
Yep.
and less root vegetable heavy. And this time of year, I really look towards one of my favorite books, which is Six Seasons: A New Way with Vegetables by Joshua McFadden. I eat mostly vegetarian at home, and he really does a great job of presenting vegetables in a holistic kind of a way, if that makes sense. He appreciates the vegetable and knows how to prepare it to its best.
Yeah.
So I love that one right now.
Wonderful. We will be sure to link to that also in the show notes. So tell us a little bit about how we can connect with you and America's Test Kitchen online.
Yes. So definitely follow us at Test Kitchen. I'm at Pixley Pix, Pixley Pics. We're on TV. We have our own podcast too. You can find our magazines and cookbooks wherever you get your magazines and cookbooks. We're all over the place. Find us at americastestkitchen.com and sign up for a digital subscription where you can find a lot of our book recipes in addition to all the recipes from the magazines.
Wonderful. And Cook's Country and Cook's Illustrated still available in print.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a mail order subscription. Still no advertising?
Mm-hmm, that's right. No advertising.
I think it's wonderful. And then your content is really driven then by the people who subscribe.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wonderful magazine. And I think that if anyone isn't familiar with your magazines, either Cook's Country or Cook's Illustrated, they're two different types of magazines, but certainly fun magazine to get in the mail, and it's always enjoyable to sit down, look through it, read equipment reviews, try a new recipe. I think it's something that is some of my listeners, maybe if you're not familiar with it, would be interested in that also.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I wish you all nothing but the best with your beautiful new book, and thank you for taking the time to come talk to us and share all about baking for two with the Cookbook Love audience.
Thanks so much for having me, Maggie. It was great to talk to you too.
Yes. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green, and until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.